Done. Okay, so now the one other thing I need to do is put some, hold on. Okay, so this is going to be subtitles, and I want to insist for those of you that are not used to it, that the regular language is going to be correct, but it hasn't found a way yet to translate the names properly. So any last names or country names might be completely distorted. So disregard that. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about a guy that very few people know. In general, the 16th century was a time of great upheaval, but also discoveries and ideological struggles. As we know, we had a lot of revolution in Western Europe, but what is interesting that where they most of the time knew the principal actors politically in Europe, like Francis I, Charles V, Elizabeth of England, or whatever, they don't know Rudolf II of Prague, who was the Holy Roman Emperor at that time. And this is why we're going to talk about him, where he had a very bizarre and fascinating character, and his reign was also punctuated by a lot of misfortunes. But he has left us quite a legacy scientifically, just by the fact of sponsoring Kepler, who was at his court. So let's look at his, it's always frozen for the first time. Look at the genealogical tree. He's a Habsburg. And so we go back all the way up where the real power of the Habsburg happened with Maximilian. When she married the Rich, who was the daughter of the last of the Duke of Burgundy. The Charles the Bold had died in a battle. And she found herself at the head of an enormous succession, but that was quite envied by the King of France. And so to save her from the grasp of the King of France, they very quickly married her to Maximilian, who was a Habsburg and was a Holy Roman Emperor at the time. She didn't live very long. Unfortunately, she died in a horseback riding accident. But they had two children, Philip the Handsome and Margaret. As at that time, you know, all these children are real tools in the alliances around Europe. So Philip the Handsome is going to marry Joanna, who was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic kings. And they're going to have a whole series of children, though he's going to die very young too, before actually the death of Maximilian. He dies just before Maximilian. Margaret is going to start by marrying the brother of Joanna, Don Juan, who was the heir of the throne of Spain, but he didn't survive, apparently, the crazy nights of love, and died young. And so she was sent back to the Netherlands, where she was born. So among the children of Philip and Joanna, we find the most important here, who is Charles V, who becomes the Holy Roman Emperor, who is going to marry his sister to Francis I, King of France, and they are going to become mortal enemies. They're going to fight during the whole time. Ferdinand, the brother of Charles V, is a little later, especially when Charles abdicates, is going to inherit the whole eastern part of the Habsburg territories, which means Austria, the German states become, the German states don't belong to them, but he becomes emperor over them. And then you can see some daughters that all are going to marry into royal families. Mary is going to become the queen of Hungary. Catherine is becoming the queen of Portugal. There is a very long alliance between Portugal and Spain. That's really where a lot of the male of the Habsburg family find their spouses. And this is going to have quite an impact on the Habsburg in the sense that they have that trait of melancholy. And so when you talk about the Portuguese, it's always they're very melancholic. I'm talking about the queens and so on. And this is going to impact the Habsburg. So Charles V is going to have a son, Philip II, marries Isabella of Portugal. And Philip II is going to marry 4 times because his wives die very young, most of them in childbirth, which was typical. And they all died around 20, 21, 22. It was frightening to become a queen that time, believe me. So finally, with Elizabeth of Valois, who is the daughter of Catherine of Medici, he becomes the father of Isabella Clara Eugenia, who he adores. But she's a woman and he wants a male heir. And finally, when Elizabeth dies at age 21 or so, he marries Anne of Austria. And Anne of Austria is a sister of Rudolf II. So I couldn't make the link if you want. Rudolf, you see here, is the brother of Anne of Austria. Anne of Austria is going to give birth to Philip III, but is going to die shortly after also. And so he wants to marry a 5th time, and the only one that is worthy of him and his position would be the younger sister of Anne of Austria, who was unfortunately a deformed child. And she came there, despite her deformity, when she saw that guy with white hair and rather old, she did a 180 and went straight to a convent. She said, I'd rather be in a convent than marry that guy. And so that was the last try for Philip II. Now, if you look well, that's why I show you this, is you can see the consanguinity that you have, that inbreeding that is absolutely terrible. The Habsburg always marry first cousins or nieces. And so you can imagine that would anybody have some problem if you have a weakness, we're talking about genes and so on, it very quickly accumulates. And so they more and more, and especially it's visible with the crown of Spain, the last king of Spain before that died without heir was completely deformed, couldn't even eat, his jaw wouldn't meet. And so it was absolutely awful. So if we look at Ferdinand, because this is what interests us here. So Ferdinand, the brother of Charles V, he's going to have many children, but the most important is Maximilian II. And Maximilian II was different. He didn't seem to suffer from the melancholy brought by the Portuguese. And he was a very beloved emperor during his life, had been raised, don't forget, we're talking about at that time, it's Reformation. So we have all these conflicts in the German states and so on with Reformation. And he was open to both. So he was raised as a Catholic, but he had been tutored by people that were leaning towards Martin Luther. And so he was very open to both religion and wanted tolerance by all means. He was a very, as I say, beloved person. He was a nice guy. He married the sister of Philip II, who was a strong Catholic woman and absolutely you couldn't move her face. I mean, she was Catholic with limits on both sides. That's all she wanted to hear. And he was, as I say, very tolerant. So there was a big barrier between the two of them. They had a whole series of children, 13 of them. And but the problem was really the faith, where Maximilian wanted his children to be raised in a tolerant manner and liberal manner. She wanted just Catholicism and rigid, as the court was in Spain. A very big contrast between the court in Vienna or Prague and the court in Madrid. The court in Madrid, they were all dressed in black, and it was, everything was regimented, a very, very strict etiquette, which wasn't the case in Vienna. And so, to please her brother, Philip II, she sent her two elder sons, Rudolf and Ernest, to Spain, and they're going to live there for a few years within that very strict court, which is going to be tough for them. And they're going to stay there until Maximilian dies, and then they have to come back. But they've been marked forever by that experience in Madrid. And so this is why I really wanted to talk, because that's going to forge the character of Rudolf, who's going to come back totally stiff. The people don't recognize him except his mother, who loves it, thinks it's really great. But he is going to inherit the throne from Maximilian. And Maximilian, when he dies, is going to be, it refuses to split his empire between his sons. And so he decides that only Rudolf is going to inherit the territory, his empire, and the others are going to be compensated by part of the collection that they owned. And they had an extraordinary collection of art and scientific instrument and other things that they considered sacred. Rudolf is going to resent that, actually, because some of them are so much part of the Habsburg inheritance that he's going to manage to bring back some of the most important pieces, and we'll talk about that later. So this gives you an idea why here we have Rudolf. His younger brother is Matthias, and Matthias and him don't get along at all. There is total opposition between these two. They hate each other, and it's going to be Matthias who's going to bring the demise of Rudolf II and will become the next emperor. So I hope you're not completely lost in
Was Matthias the second son?
No, it's Ernest. Ernest is the second son.
Oh.
Ernest, when he came back, became governor of the Low Countries that at that time were part of the Habsburg territory. But then Matthias is going to go too. He's going to be hated over there because he doesn't know what he's doing. And so Ernest is going to only be there for a year and a half. He's going to die very, very young. And so just an idea of the Rudolf II. He was born in Vienna in 52, became emperor in 76. So he's 24 when he becomes emperor. And for him, you know, there's a whole regalia that happens when you have, first you have the funeral of Maximilian II, where he's just dressed all in black and has all these black veils around him that isolate him from other people. But then all the nobility in the German state and around the empire are going to come by, and they have to come and kiss his feet and really really promise their allegiance, that this is going to be the way that they're going to obey to his orders. And he hates it. He absolutely hates it. The idea of dominating people, having to resolve their problem, and he's got tons of problems to resolve, really is not his favorite thing to do. All he dreams of is art and sciences. This is what he wants to spend his life at. So he moved the capital from Vienna to Prague in 83. Prague had been before the seat of the empire. So it was going back and forth, but Prague was a much larger city than Vienna at the time. And so he prefers that. There is already a castle that he likes and that he's going to enlarge significantly. His collection, and that's what we're here to talk about, he owned the most extensive cabinet of curiosities, in German Kunstkammer, and the collection occupied 3 rooms of the incomplete northern wing of the castle in Prague, and then was moved to the dedicated Kunstkammer that had been built for it. He loved collecting painting, older masters as well as contemporary artists. So he's going to bring in lots of artists, and those that wouldn't come, he would really try to purchase the most important paintings that they had done. He commissioned decorative objects of all kinds, and in particular, mechanical moving devices, automaton. He loved, and I would say I share that love because it's extraordinary. These were based on clockwork and so on, and were doing all kinds of things, and we'll see just a few left. He patronized botanists, astronomers, as well as some of the best scientific instrument makers of the time. He kept a menagerie of exotic animals and a botanical garden. He was known for his little zoo around the castle. People would come to Prague just to see a real lion or real wild animals. So here is the map of the Holy Roman Empire. So all the states that you see on the left of Austria and Bohemia were independent states that were led by princes and archbishops and so on, but that gave their allegiance to the emperor, would nominate the emperor. And so Rudolf was reigning all over this. So as you can see, Germany was made of over 300 states. Some are not even on the map. The handsome man that you saw at the beginning turned very quickly in a typical Habsburg person with that very big jaw that was moving forward. And it's known that is typical, called the Habsburg chin, is very typical, not particularly handsome, because of all his worries about the administration of his empire and so on. He developed very quickly stomach problems that followed him until his death. He was really anxious, and that would give him these type of problems. Joseph Heinz the Elder was one of the painters, portraitists of the time.
Was there painting on copper?
It's an oil on copper.
Particular to that part?
For the 17th century, yes. And I'll talk about it in a minute when we come to Witterwald, because that's why I brought the catalog. If you want, we can address it now, actually. It doesn't matter. At the end of the 16th century, there was more and more export of paintings from one country to the New World, for example. So from Italy or from the Low Countries, a lot of their work would go to Madrid, and then from Madrid to the New World. There was a problem with supports like wood panels or even canvas, as canvas started at the very beginning of the 16th century to be used. It's the fact that within the weather that we know in Europe, which can be very unpredictable, it reacts very strongly to difference of humidity and difference of temperature. So the hygrometry or just the temperature can contract or dilate either the wood panel or the canvas. The problem is that the pigment, once it's spread on the canvas or on the panel, doesn't dilate at the same rate as the support. And that caused the craquelures that you can see when you see a painting of that age. You have that whole network of craquelures. It's due to this difference of humidity and temperature, where you don't have a matching degree of dilation with the pigments. So they started looking for other supports, and they tried everything. They tried marble, alabaster, tiles. They tried iron, but iron rust, it's a big problem. And then at that time, don't forget, the end of the 16th century, 17th century, we see a lot of engraving, and these engravings are on copper plates. And so I said, why not using copper? The only problem they have with metal, and actually they have similar problem with the stone, if you drop, if you just put a drop of water on metal, it's not going to just go flat, it's going to stay by physical properties, it's going to stay as a little bubble. So same thing when you use pigments, you try to put it, it makes a series of little bubbles. It doesn't give you a flat surface. And we assume, because we only know that through treatises, there's nothing left that we can analyze on the copper plates, that the way to paint and keep the pigment flat and be able to paint on it is with garlic. And they would use garlic and rub the whole plate with garlic. And that would stick. If you've ever had garlic in your hands, it sticks. And that's the same for the pigment. And so, but the thing is, with time, the garlic evaporates. And so we don't have traces of it anymore to analyze. So they tried with copper, and copper was becoming more and more available in Central Europe, and particularly in Bohemia, actually where Prague is. And so there was a much better way of mining and of dealing with it. And so they started really using copper, especially for export. And so, but the great advantage that you have with copper is that it's, it shines as a metal. And it goes through, we don't even realize, but it goes through the pigment. And these paintings on copper have a brilliance that is absolutely unique. And also allows, because it's tight, you don't have weave to deal with, or the grain of the wood to deal with. You can paint minuscule little details that are absolutely extraordinary. So this is one example, but we'll see many others, because at that time it became really these, especially these smaller format paintings that were cabinet paintings. Why cabinet paintings? Is because they were in smaller rooms and you could come and look at them very close. And so this was becoming the thing, is to give details that were unique. So this is an idea of the Prague castle in 1595 by the Dutch artist Hoefnagel, colored etchings, and it shows you how the landscape of Prague with the river going in between, and then you have the castle on the other side. The castle was begun in 870. And then within the walls, they built the big churches. And here is a picture, contemporary picture. In 1541, a large fire destroyed large parts of the castles. And so they started building the new castle in Renaissance style, which was also far more comfortable than what existed before. And this is the little, what's called the Golden Lane. It's a small street that is along the castle wall. So here is the wall of the castle, and all the little shops were there, and where the little houses of craftsmen that came to work for Rudolf, particularly goldsmiths, of stone cutters, and so on. It was then modified. It became kind of a dump for a while, and then in the 20th century they recovered them and repainted them really pretty, and now they are old shops that sell specialties made in Prague. As I mentioned, Rudolf surrounded himself with very important scientists, including Tycho Brahe and the Danish astronomer, and Johannes Kepler, who was a German astronomer. And by sponsoring them, you know, he allowed them to develop all their theories. And it's really the very beginning of modern astronomy. Just to Tycho Brahe was Danish, but was extremely appreciated in Denmark until the King Ferdinand died, and his son Christian was old, but he was a warrior. That's all interested him is combat, and so he pushed Tycho Brahe out of the court, and so he. Rudolf heard about it and immediately told him to move with his family to Prague. And there he was treated as royalty. He didn't stay very long. He died over there, probably poisoned. But he was treated, and his children, as royalty. Kepler came and seconded him. He was one of his assistants. Just to give you an idea of the timeline for astronomy, so you have Copernicus that dies in 1543. And then we have the Tycho Brahe, who is the last one who's going to observe the skies without a telescope. And so all the research that he does is done with naked eye. But then we have Galileo Galilei, who is going to use the telescope, and Kepler, who is going to improve. And then you have the Dutch Christian Huygens, who is going to develop lenses that are much more adapted to that kind of work. And then finally, Isaac Newton. So you have an idea of that projection. One takes, profits of the research of the previous one. Tycho Brahe was allowed by the King of Denmark to build Uraniborg. That was an observatory that was built there with a tower, but again without telescope. That was just naked eye, and he had all his instruments to study the distances between stars and planets and so on. He realized that the tower that was there, you see him here surrounded by instruments. But he realized then that the tower that was in the middle of that observatory was moved by the winds. And so the calculation, the computation was not perfect. And so he decided to build another one, and this time partly underground. That was very stable, and it also allowed him to put, when he had many assistants, to put them in that other place, and he could be by himself in the previous one. It still exists. This one still exists. The Sternborg is really the city of stars. And here are some of the works by Tycho Brahe. Showing the supernova. This is in 1572. He observed that was that very brilliant star, and he started looking, and by seeing the fact that it was moving at a different place from the rest, he could see that it was beyond the sun. And at that time, it was believed that nothing was beyond the sun. And so when he saw the way, he said, no, it's beyond the sun. So that was the first discovery. And then it became known as a supernova. On the other side, you have also the way he calculates the distance between the planets. Kepler was his assistant, and he was a German Lutheran astronomer, mathematician, astrologer, natural philosopher, and writer on music. All these men, so, were so incredible, but had multiple specialties. He was definitely a 17th century part of the scientific revolution. He was known for his laws of planetary motion and his book Astronomia Nova, Harmonice Mundi, and works also other on the works of Copernicus. His works influenced Isaac Newton too. It was interesting because at that time, astronomy and astrology were not very much differentiated. They all believed that the influence of the stars on our lives, which was part of astrology, but astrology was also looking at the movements of the planets and of the stars. So it's only later on that it became completely separated. Also, it was tinted by religion. They really were including religion within their works and looking at the works of Aristotle quite a bit. So he gives you his idea of the cosmos, how the sun and the earth related to one another. Now, the most important thing that for us is his encyclopedic collection. And this is something that developed during the late 16th century and became quite common in the 17th century. It's in German, as I said, it's Kunstkammer, so the room of art. We see that there's a competition between the courts who had the most extraordinary encyclopedic collection. They at first look at the Italian. The Gonzaga and the Este had some quite a collection, but it becomes a systematic collection in the north. And so we'll see this, for example, Jacopo Strada, painted here by Titian, was one who was in charge of a collection in Italy. And just for the fun of it, this is a painting by David Teniers of the collection of the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, who is a nephew of Rudolf, and you can see that the painting of Strada by Titian is part of his collection. So just to give you an idea of this collection, it was defined, the collection, by Samuel Kirchberg, who was a physician, but also a scientist, and was hired by one of the princes in the German state to systematize the idea of the encyclopedic collection, to make it into categories and really make it a scientific, have a scientific approach to it. This is not universal in the sense some will follow this, some will add a few categories to the one of Samuel Kirchberg. He wrote the Inscriptiones vel tituli Theatri Amplissimi, which is the Teatrum Mundi, the world theater. It's that idea that his encyclopedic collection are really a reproduction of the theater of the world, if you want. These collections are held into Kunstkammer or Wunderkammer. Wunderkammer is wonder room, and become an ideal museum. So in an ideal museum, you have one category is Historia, which shows portraits, genealogies, map. Two is Artificialia, are arts and crafts made by human being. The three is Naturalia, is samples of animals, vegetables, and minerals. The four is Mirabilia, are extraordinary objects. And five is Antiquita, which is classical art. So these were the more or less the categories that they were separated into. So you have Historia, and just give you an example, this is a portrait of Rudolf II by Sadler. And on the other side, you have a view of the castle in Prague, but this is not a painting. It's made of stone. It's pietra dura. So it's all stones of different colors that form that representation. It's wonderful. They do these beautiful tables in Italy for that. Then you have Artificialia, and that's all things made by human being, and that will include also paintings and sculptures. But I show you these incredible objects. The one is a clock. See. It's called the grünes Gewölbe, so the green vault. That's a nautilus shell, that is all surrounded by gilded bronze and used as cup. The famous Farnese cup, which is a kind of a large cup with cameo-like sculpture that dates back to Ptolemy, so it's about 300 BCE. Oh, sorry. Here we are. Here it's a horn that is also worked into some gilded bronze. And that's the work that I love. It's a cherry nut with 60 faces sculpted on it. So do you figure a cherry nut? I brought it one day when we were talking. It's about that big, it's less than a quarter of an inch, and 60 faces distinctly different, sculpted on it, and then put it as a pendant. And these are also interesting, made sculpted in ivory, but the different globes in it that are completely independent of each other. So this is done without ever cutting and putting them together. They sculpted, as you see there, and go into it and sculpt. But you can turn them around independently of each other.
Are these pieces in Prague?
No, this is a general example. Yeah, I'm not in Rudolf right now. I just show you the categories. In Naturalia, you had the blowfish. This is a bird. An elephant skull. Oh, I forgot to bring it. Shark tooth. Sharks lose 24,000 teeth in their lifetime. And these are prehistoric, they're fossils. And so you could find them on the beach. In some places you find these teeth, and I have one at home I was going to bring. I forgot to bring it. Mirabilia are these very strange things. This is a rhinoceros horn. This is the painting of a man that you can see was completely covered with hair. And actually, I think that one is not even a man, she's a woman. But that was quite, the other story is a noble Hungarian who got wounded in the combat, and that weapon went through his eye, but he survived. And that's a horn that was believed to be a unicorn horn. So these are the kind of very special things that thought were miraculous. And in Antiquita, it's easy. It's any cameos or coins or objects, any sculpture made in the antiquity. That was part of it. So here is the art cabinet. And to show you how important it was, you have that painting by Anton Mozart that shows the arrival of an art cabinet at the court of Philip II, Duke of Pomerania. And you can see that very beautiful, large cabinet, many of them made in Antwerp. And then we had these all kind of drawers and secret drawers, and people would keep in there small objects like coins, medals, shelves, and so on. And so these were, and all the doors were painted, and often these doors were on copper, so painting on copper. You see, he's holding in the center, he's holding one of the drawers that comes from there, with somewhere more modest, but still beautiful, like the Kunstschrank, so the little cupboard of art that is in the Getty. So not too far from us, and you can see just surrounded with shells and paintings. And you can see that all these are decorated with, these are shells that are painted on. Another small one is an amber casket that is already in mirabilia in itself. So it's a large piece of amber. And I had the chance when I was at Sotheby in London, I knew one of the people, one of the specialists there, and he said, you have to come in the room. So they took me in the back rooms. And in one room with natural light was the casket in the middle of a table. And if you know amber, it's slightly translucent. And so the sun was shining, despite London, but it was shining. And you could really see that golden, honey gold color of the casket. It sold for about 600,000 pounds. And just to show you, this is a cabinet that belonged to a scientist. So that was not a prince, but he had all kind of special things. So you have alligators and other fish that hanging from the ceiling, and all categories around are showing small animals or shells that were very valuable at that time. Another Kunstkammer here in Halle, Germany. You had one cupboard for each of the categories. So that's in general. So now we're going to focus on Rudolf. And before we do that, I would propose to just take a little break, have a cup of coffee, a glass of water, and take the time to come and look at the books because it's really worth it. Okay, so there we are. And yes, please, thank you. So talking now about the collection of Rudolf, we have to realize, of course, he didn't start the collection. He was inheriting part of the collection from Maximilian and some of his uncles that died without heirs. And so don't forget that most of the governors of the Low Countries with painters like Bruegel and so on bought a lot of art in Belgium. And then whenever their time was over as governors, they would bring that back to Vienna or to Prague. So there is a lot we'll see that they inherited, but then beside that, of course, he commissioned lots of works. So just as usual, let me restart this guy because, okay, here is the crown and the scepter and the globe of Rudolf that is kept at the Hofburg in Vienna. He also inherited the collection of a relative that owned the Schloss Ambras in Innsbruck, Austria. Ferdinand, who died in 1595, had a very beautiful collection, but his inheritor, who was Charles Margrave of Beaugard, had no interest in the collection and so sold it to Rudolf. And a lot is now back into Schloss Ambras. Just to show you, this is the room, the small armory in the castle. Now, the location of the Kunstkammer in the Prague castle is the subject of discussion between scholars. Definitely, this room would have been one of them. But he was supposed to have, the Kunstkammer was made of 4 or 5 different rooms with different, probably separated categories. A part of his collection was the Codex Gigas. This is showing the illustration of the devil that dated back to the 13th century. And as you can see, is now part of the National Library of Sweden. And why is it in Sweden? It's because the Swedish, at the end of the war between Austria and Sweden, looted, because they won, and they looted what was left of the collection in Prague and took it. Yes.
And I may have missed it, but who put together this book, the collection of devils, and what is the source of it?
What was the?
This book, the Codex.
Yeah.
Images of the devil.
Who was the editor of the book? Or who put the books together? I think.
Oh, this goes back to the 13th century. This was anonymous. We never know who the makers are. We know sometimes the monastery in which it was made, but we rarely know that it was never signed and very rarely documented for who made it. So these were, and sometimes, and often it was not the work of one person. You typically had an illustrator and you had scribes. And so they would share the task for doing these books. And even older one is going back to the 6th century, and it's called the Codex Argenteus, and it's also in Sweden, so was looted by the Swedes at the end of the war between them. It was actually split, and only half of the pages are surviving. The others, we have no idea where they are. It was for a while in the Speyer Cathedral, and then was put back with the ones that survived. But you can see it's done in old script. At that time, they had no spaces between the words. So you had to read it. And by the intonation, you knew that it was different words, but you only have spaces between the sentences. Works like this by Caspar Lehmann is an engraving of Rudolf II. And by Ottavio Miseroni, who is an Italian goldsmith and sculptor that worked particularly for Rudolf. Is a cameo here of Rudolf II. Part of Artificiala, this would look, you have an idea about how the room might have looked, where you had all these incredible objects that were made by these craftsmen on the Golden Lane for Rudolf, who loved it, made very often in either ivory or sometimes terracotta covered with paint. But for example, on the right, you see the, oops, sorry. I'm sorry, that's my mom. Mamie, je donne cours. Je donne cours, je te rappelle. Okay? Sorry, I had told her, but she forgot. So you see that's the Kepler star. And again, these are things that are made and don't touch each other's side. They're independent, if you want. But on the left here, you see some of these amazing objects. Elle n'a pas compris. So sorry. So sorry. Maman, je donne cours. Okay, merci. Sorry. I'm so happy she called, but she forgot that the Tuesday it's no. As I mentioned, they loved automaton, and here is a celestial globe with clockwork. And so you have within, you have a clock, and that would at time, it would just follow the globe would follow the time of the day. So extraordinary work. It's at the Metropolitan Museum, by the way, but it is originated from the collection of Rudolf II. Here is a rock crystal clock. Most of the work of when Rudolf was incarcerated, and we'll talk about it in a minute, and died, most of the collection was moved to Vienna. And then the Swedes took most of what was left at the end of the war. Pardon?
What's the distance between Prague and Vienna?
I showed you a map earlier. I would say probably something like 400 kilometers or something.
Wow, by train.
So if you want in miles, you you divide by 1.5. And this one is amazing. It's Diana and the Centaur. And you see surrounded by dogs with a clock. And so when the clock was working, when it came to the hour, the Centaur would pivot on that thing and then stop in front of someone. This had wheels, so it could move the two on the table. And then when he would be just aiming with his arrow to someone, that person had to drink a glass and finish it. And so these were called these drinking games. So that they enjoy this type of thing. But then the dogs would bark. There was a whole incredible system that was going around there. Same thing with that automaton in the form of a nef. That would also roll, and that would also be part of these drinking games. This is a vertical sundial, also commissioned by Rudolf from Erasmus Habermehl. He collected, as we said, older masters, and for Austrian, the old master by excellence was Dürer. And so he got some of the most important painting by Dürer, the Adoration of the Magi that he did in 1504. It's during his trip to Italy, second trip to Italy. And this one that he also did in Italy during his second trip, the Feast of the Rosary, in which he actually appears. There is Dürer himself, but there is the Emperor Maximilian II, who had died at that time, no, was still alive at that time, and he was the Archbishop, and a lot of important figures that whose portrait they were. Here you can see Dürer self-portrait.
See what his note says, or do you know what his note, what is this? Do you know what it says?
It's a signature, and
Oh.
it just said, I had it on the other. Let me see if I can read it from here. No, I had, let me see if I have it on here. It's the Feast of the Rosary. I had the text. No, for whatever reason, it disappeared. I can find out and I'll let you know. And this is a piece that was made after Dürer, the female nude in early 17th century. That actually was done later because Dürer died in 1521. So that was done, but after an engraving by Dürer. He also inherited a whole series of painting of Peter Bruegel the Elder. Again, that's through his uncles, or brothers that went to Belgium and were governors there. Now, the interesting is that Bruegel and then his son Peter the Younger painted many of these Massacre of the Innocents. But we know that this one is the original by Peter Bruegel because Rudolf hated to see dead children. And so he had them all painted over. And so you can't see any of the dead children on that one, but we have copies by by Peter Bruegel the Younger, where the children are there. And so we know that it's been painted over because he didn't like that. But that's a very typical northern landscape with that terrible episode of the Massacre of the Innocent. But he also inherited, and that's amazing, is the Labor of the Months, the famous series of paintings of which we miss one. So we have only 5 extant that are at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in a special room for those who has been to the Kunsthistorisches here. So you know that there is one particular room that has been built to house all the paintings by Bruegel, because they are on panel. They're very sensitive to change of temperature and humidity. And so they build within the Kunsthistorisches Museum is a huge building. And so within the room, they build that extra room with glass windows, but it is totally hygrometry, has the hygrometry and the temperature regulated by people to keep it constant so that the paintings don't suffer. So this one is one that is in Prague, not in Vienna, and it shows the haymaking, so it's July. And it's absolutely, I'll stop on it because I'm in love with Bruegel. And I want to show you the detail. These paintings not only have that amazing atmosphere, but then you look at it in detail and you see how they are putting all the hay together on these big carriages. And the guy on top of it that is helping it. It's so well made. Or in the very background with the typical aerial atmospheric perspective where it changes the color in the background. You have the detail of what's happening in the village, people playing. The other one is August, which is in the Metropolitan, known with the people resting under the tree. And then there again, you have the whole life in the background. This one is in the Kunsthistorisches, this is November. And it shows the return of the herd. And interesting is along the river, you see the gallows that are ready there, waiting for the next victim. And then my very favorite, the Hunters in the Snow, that represents January. And remember, you know, he's painting, he's a Belgian painter. It's a flat country. The northern Belgium is totally flat. But he's been through the Alps. He went through Italy, and being through the Alps, he always includes some mountains. He loves that relief. But it's absolutely, again, one of these beautiful, you can feel the palette that he uses. You can feel the cold just looking at it. And look at the detail. You have people skating, people carrying wood, playing golf on the ice. That's, I think, my very favorite painting of all. And then February, that's also in Vienna, and it shows you that Belgian waffles existed before the 18th century. And you can see them eating the waffles, because I hear that regularly, you know, Belgian waffles, first of all, it's my daughter suffered from that when we moved to the US because they knew she was Belgian, so they would call her Belgian waffle. And and then, you know, you read the history, oh yeah, the Belgian waffles go back to the 18th century. And I say, wrong. It's back to the 16th century at least. And again, you can see how the thatched roofs are in need of repair. He collected the painting by Paolo Veronese. That was closer to him in time, but he loved his work. He never got Veronese to come over, but he bought many of them. One of his favorite painters that he brought to the court was Giuseppe Arcimboldo. And Arcimboldo was a very talented painter, but one of his specialty was to make these portraits varying, you know, either where the different elements or where the different seasons. And he would use objects that related to either the season or the element to build up the whole face. And it's fascinating because he succeeds, I think, very well to show it the human face. You have autumn that is in Denver made of, if you look at it, you have deers, you have rabbits, all different animals that belong to that period of time. In the winter, we have twigs and roots, and then some fruits that grow late in the season. Earth, you have different objects again that are part of the earth, including an upside down barrel. And then water, you have all kind of seafood and fish that form the face. He even made a portrait of Rudolf as Vertumnus, the Roman god of the season. And you can see again, it's all made of vegetables and fruits. Very, very typical of Arcimboldo. He also, he was in love with the works of Wittewaal. And Wittewaal was a Dutch painter, but that was also a very successful merchant. So he painted when he had time and when he loved it, but was a first-class painter. We know that Rudolf never married, though they tried desperately to settle him. But he didn't want to have anybody ruling his life. And so he didn't want to get married. And so again, he was, as I mentioned about Caravaggio, he was a man that would take advantage of the moment. So if women were available, he would use them. If he was clustered, for example, and just with men, he would use men. So that was his way of using. But again, very special character that was formed by the different problems he had between his mother and father and between the courts. He particularly liked nudes, and so Wittewaal is known to made a lot of paintings with nudes, some very graphic, by the way, that we also know that he possessed, and it's in the catalog. It was here for the exhibition Copper's Canvas, which shows Venus and Mars in action, discovered by other gods. Bartholomew Spranger was a painter, a Dutch painter that he attracted to the court and gave him all kinds of works. It's religious painting. This one is, I would say, almost a political statement that shows allegory of the Emperor Rudolf II that is shown here. You have the different allegories with all his powers and attributes. And he became a valet de chamber which was a high level title for a painter. Here is allegory of virtues and vices of the court of Charles V, so his ancestor. And objects that were particularly refined, like this crucifixion made of, help me. Coral, exactly. So you can see the crucifixion, the two thieves, and then Christ in the middle. Sculptures like the one by Adrien de Vries, a Dutchman, of Apollo. That's a rather small one. No, a very special one. Here, the Small Death, third line, by Hans Leinberger. Quite a stunning representation. And then beautiful objects, as we've seen in other collections. You have that rock crystal lid tankard, all engraved, a table bell. It's just the problem, as I say, is that his collection was so spread after he died that it's difficult to put together exactly. The book that is there is really the one that documents everything that he had at the time. Oh, beautiful here is the bowl with snake handles. He really loved what was beautiful, there's no doubt. In Antiquita, they had the famous Gemma Augustea, that is at the Kunsthistorisches, which is a low relief cameo engraved gem from an Arabian onyx stone. It's 7.5 by 9 inches. Look at the detail, yes.
And would he use these objects like the table bell, or were they always just?
No, so many objects would be decoration on the tables. Yeah, the objects that were fragile would stay as a display. But look at the detail of that piece, it's just incredible. Dates back to the 9th century. Sorry, 9 to 12 of the 1st century. The Brigos painter cup, so that's a really old 5th century BCE. That shows people coming to try to get the body of Hector, which lays under the couch of Achilles. Now, in the Mirabilia, we only have a few pieces left. This is mandrake in the shape of a crucifix. And mandrakes were roots of a plant that had very, very special forms. And some came out almost like bodies of babies and so on. But this is as a crucifix. Oh, that bezoar vessel on foot. The bezoar is a tightly packed collection of partially digested or undigested material that most commonly occurs in the stomach. And so this is petrified and becomes that, that's for our doctor at the back there. Ever found that, Mike? And then sometimes, as they say, they had the best and the most ridiculous. During Rudolf's lifetime, two of the most precious pieces that were in the collection was the unicorn horn that you see there on the left. That was considered really, that had been inherited from Habsburg to Habsburg, comes probably from Constantinople, and was a very large narwhal tusk, in fact. But at that time, they thought it was the tusk of a unicorn. And here you can see a modern photograph of an Inuit holding the narwhal's tusk there. So it's very large, but they thought that was that it pertained to the unicorn. And on the right is actually a goblet made out of the narwhal tusk. The other very precious object was that agate dish that was qualified as the Holy Grail, and that apparently within the grain of the shell, if you want, of the it's agate actually, was the name Christos appeared. For those that was a Christo, Rexxpp, was to be read within the grain of the agate ball. So these, in fact, are absolutely not precious, neither of them, but at that time had the biggest value of the whole collection. And the unicorn horn, as well as this, were inherited by a brother of Rudolf at the death of Maximilian. And he did everything to bring them back because it was central to his collection. So did he think. So these were beliefs until it took another century to discredit the idea of a unicorn. And here is a painting that was part of that Mirabilia, also showing a sea unicorn. And of course, that was bringing it back to the narwhal. So as a conclusion, his demise between 1593 and 1606, there was a constant conflict with the Ottoman Empire. The Hungarian that were mostly constituting the army that was going against the Ottoman had enough of that constant war because they were the tools to go against them. And so they made an uprising, the Boxai, what they call the Boxkai uprising in 1604. And so he had to deal with that. And it's actually his brother Matthias who finally forged the Peace of Vienna and the Peace of, and I'm not going to pronounce that because I can't, in 1606. Also, as I mentioned, Rudolf was very liberal like his father. So he gave he gave good treatment to the Protestants who were applying a lot of pressure, especially coming from Germany, where the Reformed Church had really taken grip. But he also, during his lifetime, the Jewish population grew quite a bit in his empire because he was extremely tolerant and welcoming the Jews there too. But in 1609, despite his tolerance, the Protestants asked for more, and so they wanted greater religious liberty, and he had the pressure of the Pope saying, no, you can't do that. You know, it was a difficult situation. And so he said no, and finally they revolted against him, and Matthias took advantage of that, came and decided to topple him, and he was incarcerated in the castle in Prague for 5 years, after which he died. And Matthias became the emperor at his death. In 1648, the Swedish army invaded Prague, and the soldiers took away with them 470 paintings, 69 bronze statues, 179 ivory objects, and 600 agate and crystal goblets. And that's why you have so many objects that used to belong to his collection that are in Sweden, and some have been sold, and so you have the Metropolitan and other museum, Denver, that benefit from that too. And so this is how, unfortunately for him, he died a very unhappy man. He really suffered from all these contingency that he had around him during his lifetime, but put together a great collection. So thank you very much. I didn't put the next slide. Let me just stop the recording.
Yeah.
Come on. Stop recording.